There are wars fought over land, wars fought over oil, wars fought over power, religion, and ideology. And then there is the Emu War. In 1932, the Australian government deployed trained soldiers, armed with military-grade machine guns, to fight an enemy that had been terrorizing the countryside. The operation was led by a decorated World War I officer. The government was confident. The press was watching. The outcome seemed obvious. The enemy had no weapons, no strategy, no leader, no uniforms. The enemy was birds, and Australia lost. This is not a joke. This is a documented historical event that actually happened, was reported by journalists, debated in Parliament, and studied by military historians. And the story behind it is far stranger and far more fascinating than most people realise. Today, we are going through the full story of the Great Emu War of 1932, why it happened, how it unfolded, why the emus won, and what Australia quietly learned from one of the most embarrassing military operations in modern history. Chapter 2. Meet the Emu, Know Your Enemy. Before we get into the war itself, you need to understand what Australia was actually up against. Because if you picture a soft, silly bird, you are dangerously wrong. The emu is the second largest bird on the planet. An adult emu stands nearly 2 meters tall and can weigh up to 60 kilograms. They cannot fly, but they can run at speeds of up to 50 kilometers per hour. They have powerful claws, sharp enough to tear through fencing, and a thick coat of feathers that acts almost like armor, absorbing and deflecting blows with surprising efficiency. Emus are also remarkably resilient. They travel enormous distances in search of food and water. They operate in large groups, sometimes in the thousands, and when they move with purpose. They are not aggressive by nature, but they are not afraid either. An emu does not panic. An emu does not retreat. It simply continues doing what it was doing, and if something gets in its way, it deals with it and moves on. The emu is perfectly designed to survive the Australian outback. What it was not designed to do, and yet somehow managed, was survive a military campaign. Chapter 3. The Setup. How did this even happen? To understand the Emu War, you need to go back to the aftermath of World War I. Australia had thousands of veterans returning home from the war. The government, grateful for their service, offered many of these soldiers land grants in Western Australia, particularly in the Campion district, a vast, semi-arid stretch of land that the government believed could be turned into productive farmland. These men were called soldier settlers. They had survived trenches and battles across Europe and the Middle East. Now they were farmers, growing wheat in one of the most challenging agricultural environments on Earth. The early 1930s hit them hard. The Great Depression caused wheat prices to collapse. The government had promised subsidies that were slow to arrive. These men were struggling financially, emotionally, and practically. And then the emus arrived. Each year, emus migrated to the coastal regions of Western Australia to breed. The Campion district sat directly in their path. And as the soldiers had cleared land and planted crops, they had inadvertently created something emus find irresistible. A massive, open, well-watered food source right in the middle of their migration route. In 1932, an estimated 20,000 emus descended on the farmland. They trampled crops, broke fences, ate everything in sight, and left the land in ruin. The soldier settlers sent desperate appeals to the government. They had survived a world war. They were not going to be defeated by birds. The government responded by sending the military. Chapter 4. The operation begins. Soldiers versus birds. The man put in charge of the operation was Major G.P.W. Meredith of the Royal Australian Artillery. He arrived in November 1932 with 2 soldiers, 2 Lewis guns, military machine guns capable of firing 500 rounds per minute, and 10,000 rounds of ammunition. The plan was straightforward. Herd the emus into a concentrated area, open fire, and eliminate them in large numbers. Journalists came along to document what everyone assumed would be a swift and satisfying victory. It did not go as planned. On the first day, the emus scattered. They refused to group together in a way that made them easy targets. The moment shooting started, the flock split into dozens of smaller groups and dispersed across the terrain. Instead of a mass target, the soldiers found themselves chasing small, fast-moving clusters of birds across open countryside. The machine guns were moved onto a truck to allow for more mobility. This also failed. The outback terrain was too rough, and the emus, running at 50 kilometers per hour across land they knew intimately, were simply faster and more agile. Major Meredith reported that the emus appeared to operate in a decentralized structure. When one group was attacked, it split apart. Each subgroup then moved independently. There was no central point to strike, no leader to target, no moment of panic that caused a collapse. The emus just kept moving. After several days, the results were deeply underwhelming. Thousands of rounds had been fired. The confirmed emu casualties were embarrassingly low. The operation was suspended. Chapter 5. The media reaction. The world is watching. Word had gotten out, and the press was having a field day. Newspapers across Australia and internationally began covering the Emu War with a mixture of amusement and disbelief. Here was the Australian military, veterans of one of the most brutal conflicts in human history, failing to defeat a group of flightless birds. Wildlife expert Dominic Cervanti was quoted saying the emus could face machine guns with the invulnerability of tanks. Members of Parliament began asking uncomfortable questions. The Minister of Defence quickly tried to distance himself from the operation. Several members called for the campaign to be halted entirely, arguing it was an embarrassment to the nation. Major Meredith, to his credit, kept a straight face throughout. He reportedly said that if Australia had a military division with the bullet-carrying capacity of these birds, it would face any army in the world. It was the most honest military assessment anyone gave during the entire campaign. If you are enjoying this video, take a second to subscribe to the channel and hit the notification bell. We cover fascinating facts about countries and history every single week, and this story is just getting started. Now back to the emus. Chapter 6. Round 2 and the final count. After a brief pause, the operation was relaunched in mid-November 1932 with an adjusted approach. Rather than herding large groups, soldiers moved through the terrain engaging smaller clusters wherever they could be found. The results were marginally better, but the fundamental problem remained. The emus were too spread out, too fast, and too durable. Witnesses reported that individual emus, after being shot multiple times, would simply continue running. The layered feathers and tough musculature made them surprisingly difficult to kill cleanly. By December 1932, the numbers told the story. The military had fired approximately 10,000 rounds of ammunition. Around 986 emus were confirmed killed, though some reports suggest the real number was lower. Thousands of emus remained very much alive on the farmland. For every emu killed, roughly 10 rounds of ammunition had been expended. It was not a ratio any military commander would want to defend in public. The emus remained. The farmers were still struggling, and Australia quietly closed the book on what had been, by any honest measure, a military failure. Chapter 7. Why the emus won. The real analysis. So how did this happen? How did 20,000 birds defeat a military operation? The answer comes down to 4 factors that any military strategist would recognize. First, terrain. The emus were operating in their natural environment. They knew the land, they were built for it, and they used it instinctively. The soldiers and their equipment were not. Second, decentralization. The emus had no command structure, which sounds like a weakness but was actually a strength. When you attack a decentralized enemy, there is no critical point to strike. Every group that scattered simply became a new independent unit. You cannot decapitate a leaderless organization. Third, resilience. The emus were physically tough enough to absorb damage that would stop most animals. Combined with their speed, this made elimination extremely difficult. Fourth, numbers. The sheer volume of emus meant that even weeks of operations could not make a meaningful dent in the overall population. Military historians have pointed out that the Emu War is a textbook example of what happens when a conventional, centralized military force tries to defeat a decentralized, mobile, and numerically superior opponent on unfamiliar terrain. The lessons apply equally well to guerrilla warfare and asymmetric conflicts throughout history. The emus did not win because they were smart. They won because the conditions made defeating them nearly impossible, regardless of firepower. Chapter 8. The Aftermath and the Bigger Picture. The farmers were still dealing with emus long after the military withdrew. Over the following years, the government introduced bounty systems and funded fencing programs to help protect crops. These efforts had mixed results, but were at least more honest about the scale of the problem. The emu population of Western Australia continued to grow. Today there are an estimated 625,000 to 700,000 emus in Australia, and they are protected under federal law. You cannot harm them without a permit. The farmers of the Campion district eventually found ways to coexist with the migrations through better fencing and land management. It was not the dramatic solution anyone had hoped for in 1932, but it worked. There is a broader point worth making here. Australia is a continent defined by nature pushing back. It has the most venomous snakes on Earth, the most lethal jellyfish, some of the most resilient wildlife anywhere in the world. The continent shaped its creatures over millions of years of harsh, unforgiving conditions. And when humans arrived and began reshaping the land, nature adapted. The emus did not choose to invade farmland. They were following ancient migration patterns that the farms had interrupted. They were not enemies. They were animals doing what animals do. The Emu War is a story about what happens when humans try to impose control on natural systems using force. The land keeps doing what it does. The animals keep doing what they do. And people eventually have to find a way to adapt rather than fight. It is a lesson that has played out across every continent in human history. Chapter 9. Conclusion. The war that changed nothing and everything. The Great Emu War of 1932 lasted a matter of weeks. It consumed thousands of rounds of ammunition, significant government resources, and a considerable portion of Australia's national dignity. It changed nothing immediately. The emus were still there. The farmers were still struggling. The land was still difficult. But it became a story, and stories matter. The Emu War is told today because it is funny, yes, but it is also told because it is a reminder that some battles cannot be won with force alone. That nature operates on its own terms. That resilience, adaptability, and sheer persistence can outlast firepower. And that sometimes the most honest thing a government, or a person can do is look at a situation, admit it is not going the way they planned, and find a different approach. Australia went on to become one of the great nations of the modern world. Its wildlife went on to remain extraordinary, dangerous, and completely indifferent to human plans. And somewhere in the outback, the emus are still running. If you made it to the end of this video, thank you for watching. If you learned something new or just enjoyed the story, please give this video a like. It genuinely helps the channel reach more people. And if you are not subscribed yet, now is a great time to do it. We cover country facts, world history, and surprising stories like this one every single week. Hit subscribe, turn on notifications, and come back for the next one. Drop a comment below and let us know which country or historical event you want us to cover next. We read every suggestion.